Boundaries seem to be a hot topic in our culture today, but sometimes it can be really difficult to set a boundary or even know what a boundary is. A boundary, by definition, is a line that marks the limiting of an area. I view boundaries in relationships, or boundaries period, as containers that we hold our values and our needs in. To bring more of a visual idea of boundaries, I like to think of them as if they're fencing. A firm boundary would look somewhat like a cinder block fence, being clear and consistent. There's a clear line, it's non-negotiable, it's not going anywhere, it's not moving, it's there, it's staying, it is what it is. A flexible boundary would look more like a vinyl fence. It can bend and bow and move a little bit and shift as needed when appropriate. And an enmeshed boundary would look more like a chain link fence. You know it's there, but you can see everything on the other side, and everything on the other side can see what's on the inside of that container. There's going to be a lot of things coming in and going out that you're not really going to have a whole lot of control of. Boundaries exist on a spectrum from firm to flexible. You may have heard enmeshed boundaries, you may have heard about rigid boundaries. Firm boundaries are clear, they're consistent, they're non-negotiable. Sometimes they can lead into having more rigid boundaries. A flexible boundary is adaptable and allows for some negotiating and compromise, but only where appropriate. An enmeshed boundary is blurred and unclear. It's overly involved. You may struggle with independence and have difficulty prioritizing your needs, and this can lead to a lack of autonomy. So if I want to set a boundary, or if I want to even start exploring what my boundaries are, and this is difficult in any relationship, but when you have a relationship with somebody who is struggling with addiction, it can be even more difficult because they push against the boundary. They don't necessarily have boundaries themselves, because addiction asks that we compromise our values and our needs to achieve whatever it is that addiction is giving to us. So if somebody is in self-destruct mode, they're not necessarily going to be thinking about protecting you or your boundaries. Let's just take out the relationship that you have with your addicted loved one. Let's take out relationships, period. Let's just focus on you, your relationship with yourself. I want you to think about 5 needs and 5 values that you have. And this may take a little bit of time for you to do. And I want you to think about, with each of those needs and each of those values, I want you to think about the relationship. Really explore what relationship you have with those things. Let's say one of my needs is sleep. What is my relationship with sleep? Well, I know if I don't get enough sleep, I'm not going to be able to perform at my peak the next day. And depending on what it is I need to do the next day, I may really need to hold a firm boundary around being able to get enough sleep. So if my need is sleep, I'm going to put that in the container, in the boundary. And what kind of boundary am I going to have around that? Is it going to be a firm boundary? Is it going to be an enmeshed boundary? Is it going to be a flexible boundary? And that's where I explore the relationship that I have with that need, with that value. If I have an expectation that somebody else is going to hold me accountable and making sure that my needs are met, I'm probably going to start developing some resentment around that person. My need is sleep. I haven't communicated that, but I still have an expectation that you're going to make sure I get enough sleep. I have to be the one that communicates. I have to go to bed at this time, which means I need to be home at this time. So creating a boundary around that and deciding with the relationship to the need, to the value, and to the person in mind, what kind of boundary you need to have around that. So once I have an idea of my needs and my values, there's where I bring the relationship back into it. What type of relationship is with this person? Is it reciprocal? Is it respectful? Is it reliable? Or is it more one-sided? And if we're in a relationship with somebody who is struggling with addiction, it's probably more one-sided. We're going to have to be on our toes when it comes to our boundaries. People ask me all the time, should I communicate my boundaries? Should I tell them I'm not going to do this, I am going to do this? And I'm going to say, I'm going to leave it up to you. That's something that you're going to have to decide. What type of relationship do you have with this person? Do you have the type of relationship where you can communicate that? Or do you have the type of relationship where communicating that would just cause a big argument? So bring the relationship back into this now and think about that container. When we think about values and needs inside those containers, what are we going to allow into the container and what are we going to allow out of the container? And this is where the line that marks the limiting of an area comes in into play? The boundary. So if I value communication, maybe if I think about what is my relationship with communication, what type of communication do I value? Do I value direct communication? What does that look like to me? Let's say I'm having a conversation with somebody who is communicating more passive aggressively. How do I handle that? I can say things like, I really value direct communication and this doesn't feel very direct to me. Is there something that you need to say? Is there something that I can help you resolve in this matter? Those are more direct forms of communication. It helps to get to the issue. It takes away the passive aggressiveness. It helps prevent resentment in relationships. The important thing to remember is that boundaries are very personal. They're guidelines that you set for yourself about what you're comfortable with. If we set a boundary with the expectation that somebody else is going to change their behavior to make us happy, that's a rule. That's an external regulation we enforce on others, dictating expected behavior. That isn't going to go over well. What we want to focus on in relationships is building trust and autonomy and accountability. Understanding our values and our needs helps us to establish clear boundaries for ourselves so that when a relationship may be one-sided for a period of time, we can maintain our sense of autonomy by moving away from more codependent types of behavior, which would be an enmeshed boundary. When we have more enmeshed boundaries, our happiness is contingent upon our loved one's behavior. And if our loved one is struggling with addiction, their behavior isn't going to be in line with our needs and our values, which means our behavior at all times does need to be in line with our needs and our values. How do we keep our behaviors in line with our needs and our values? Well, there's where the accountability and consequence piece comes in. So let's go back again to the containers holding our values and our boundaries. And I want you to think about these values and in your needs. Let's consider the request being made. I want you to ask yourself two questions. Take the person, take the addiction, take the situation out of it. I want you to think about your need and your value. With the request being made, is this request asking me to compromise any of my needs or my values? And give yourself time to really think about the request being made, whether it's, can you give me a ride? Do you have any cash? Can I crash at your place? Whatever the request is being made of you, ask yourself, does this require me to compromise any of my values or any of my needs? And number two, if it does, can I be okay with that? Can I be okay with the consequences that might come of that? Can I be okay with the knowledge that if I give my loved one money, if I give this person a ride, people might view it as I'm enabling them? Can I be flexible in this boundary with my loved one? Or would this request cause me to compromise my values and my needs in a way that would cause me to start developing some type of resentment or contempt towards this person, or even towards myself? Maybe I need to have a firm boundary around this value or around this need. And the firm boundary would be, no, I'm not giving you any cash. No, I'm not giving you a ride. If you do decide that you want to communicate your boundaries with people, if you do decide that you want to communicate your boundaries with your loved one, there's some things that I want you to keep in mind when communicating those boundaries. Be clear about what your boundary is. If I give you cash, then I won't be able to take care of my needs. Be respectful when you communicate your boundary. I understand that this is very important to you, but this isn't something that I can help you with right now. Be firm, be consistent, be empathetic, and be open to communication and possibly compromise. If this has been helpful, feel free to share. If you have additional questions or would like topics covered, please feel free to put them in the comments below. I hope this brought some clarity to what a boundary is, how you can discover your own boundaries, and live within the bounds of your own authenticity without losing your sense of self in your relationship with your addicted loved one. Until we meet again, take care of yourself.